joining us now, Brian DePratto, who's a senior economist with TD Economics. And Brian, obviously a huge slide here. These are April numbers, but what's your reaction?
No big surprise here, to be honest. You talk about that range of expectations. No one really knew going into this. If we go back to the March numbers, StatCan, providing that advanced estimate, they thought at that time it would be about 15%. Obviously much worse, very challenged month. Fitting the theme we've seen this week where everything's been falling by more than 20%, right? The manufacturing, the wholesale, now the retail. April really representing that the deepest part of that pandemic impact. And I think we can take a little bit of solace. I'm just looking through the report myself here now. We did get another advanced estimate here, and they're suggesting about a 19% rebound in May on their early read. They were a little too optimistic on April. Hopefully it won't be the same for May.
Yeah, let's go through that in a little more detail, and I'm just trying to pull up the numbers in real time here, but to your point, basically they are talking about retail sales in the month of May being up 19%. As we were digesting the numbers in the US for May, just for comparison's sake, some people said, wow, look at that. That's the kind of number that feeds into a story of a V-shaped recovery, and then there were others who were saying, no, we went from a period where literally nobody was buying anything to seeing a bounce off those lows. How would you characterize sort of the road to recovery if we're measuring it through the retail sector right now, Brian?
I think it's going to be a slow recovery. You're exactly right on that notion of the bounce is bound to happen. But we've seen basically a 1/3 decline in retail spending over March and April. 19% off of that lower level does not get you anywhere close to where you began. So it's encouraging to know that April was the depth of this, but it's a very long road ahead for sure.
I want to talk a little bit more about what we capture. Yesterday we got a little bit wonky, but I think it's helpful. We spoke to one of the key players at Stats Canada about how they crunch the numbers there right now. We were talking, for example, about on inflation, but let's talk about the retail market. I mean, StatsCan noting that e-commerce sales continue to shine, even if we're talking about for April, on an unadjusted basis, retail e-commerce sales accounted for a record amount of the transactions, something like almost 10% of the sales picture. And on a year-over-year basis, retail e-commerce more than doubled. So I don't think that's going to surprise some people. We're all ordering a lot more on Amazon. It's probably worth pointing out that when it comes to measuring those Amazon packages in these StatsCan numbers, we don't really get a proper reading of that. Can you just explain to us what's being captured and what's not being captured when we measure what's happening on retail these days?
Absolutely, and it's a great point, John. When it comes to the retail, what you're really seeing is basically things that happen at stores, obviously, and then things that happen at Canadian store-based e-commerce. What I mean by that is that if you order something, say, from just taking a random company, CanadianTire.ca, because that's a Canadian company, Canadian domiciled, and they're serving you out of Canada, that would get captured. Some other companies, some of the popular ones, Wayfair, for instance, those are international-based, American, I believe, in the case of Wayfair. Those don't necessarily get captured here because they don't have that retail presence. They only have, those warehouses and the distribution presence. So for a lot of this, as strong as that retail, e-commerce has been, more than doubling, as you mentioned, we're still not getting that full picture, right? We're going to have to wait till we get that quarterly GDP estimate to really get the full slice of spending overall, and of course the full picture on e-commerce.
That is really helpful. Okay, so obviously maybe the surge in e-commerce with people starting to open doors again, maybe all this together can show some signs of encouragement. As I dig a little deeper into the numbers as well, Brian, it's very clear that some of the biggest cities that have had such restrictions on activity and movement and commerce are where we saw some of the biggest hits in the April retail sales reading. Toronto stands out. I'm just looking through what StatsCan said. And it is pretty darn dramatic. And provincially, Ontario and Quebec are where we saw the biggest provincial-wide retail sales slide. And those are obviously the two provinces that we repeatedly talk about having higher numbers of COVID-19 cases than other provinces. So how do you, as an economist, measure what you think the outlook will be when we know at the end of the day the number of COVID-19 cases is clearly going to impact when certain pockets of the economy can open doors again and when we can start talking about the recovery story in more meaningful detail?
Well, one thing we're doing, well, to start with, of course, is looking at those government announcements, when things are being reopened, what types of stores, what types of activity is being allowed. One thing we're also doing is we have anonymous transaction data. So we're getting, a pseudo real time. It's about a 1 week lag picture of what that spending looks like on cards. At least we're not able to get the cash. And what we're seeing there, just to look ahead a little bit, is that as you see provinces start to reopen, Quebec moving ahead, some of the Atlantic provinces who've been very successful, in controlling the pandemic, they're starting to reopen. And what you're seeing is a reaction. You can see it with, week by week as these more stores become open. You do see that spending start to recover there. So far, it's been sustained as well, which is encouraging. What that means, though, if you think about Ontario and the longer time to reopening, more after the Victoria Day weekend, still going to be a little bit of time here. I think, it's a very encouraging sign, and those are the kinds of things we're looking to see. But again, health takes priority, and it's really contingent on what's open, what people can do, and also how confident they are, right? Keeping that curve down so people are actually willing to go out.
All right. Hey, Brian, just want to give our audience, we love our charts here at BNN Bloomberg. So we've updated a chart that just shows what's been happening with the monthly retail sales numbers now factoring in April. And the chart that we're showing our audience, it shows you how you go up and down basically for the past 15 years, a little bit here, a little bit down there. And then we see this dramatic drop in retail sales so far in 2020. We talk a lot about the importance of the U.S. consumer, for example, in driving the U.S. economy. How important do you think the Canadian consumer is ultimately going to be in this story of a recovery for our economy?
I would say that the consumer is paramount, number one on the list for me. Without having that demand there, without having that confidence, demand for things like autos, services in general, you're not getting that income coming through, whether it's on the manufacturing side, the retailer side. We're thinking more broadly, things like professional services, massages, dentists, things like that. Unless you get that flow coming through, because it's so important, right? More than 60% of the economy is consumption. You really need that to be the backbone of any meaningful recovery.
Brian, thanks so much. Really good to get your breaking news insight. Brian DePratto, senior economist at TD Economics.